best wines, tasting room, Ken Brown, legend, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Central Coast, history. This is going to be good. Sir.
Hopefully. But you know what? I think you're going to like these.
I think I'm going to like these too. I got a sneaking
before.
suspicion.
Yeah.
When did you make your first Byron Reserve Chardonnay?
Well, that would have been actually in 1984.
That long? 84 was the first reserve.
Yep, that's Byron.
Byron, yeah. See, I'm almost like an old man in the wine business myself, having gotten in the early 90s. And the early 90s, for me, the pinnacle, I think, of Central Coast Chardonnay at that time was Ken Brown's wines at Byron. I was every year, we were talking about the local rep at the time, would roll in with the new vintage every year, be at 91, 92, 93, and every year we'd just be like, oh, and I remember they were in the funky cases. They were in the funky, like, 3x4 white case. Like, I don't know if the Reserve was in a standard case or not. The Straight Byron was, but and they're kind of these weird dividers. And every year we just were so stoked when those cases rolled into the store. We were absolutely psyched. And those wines to me had they were rich, but still had a vibrancy to them. You know, even for the time, even in the world.
The verve.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had a hum. Yeah. They had a, and you know, when we come back and the last, okay, so it's been, you know, fast forward. Talk about 91 Reserve. Let's fast forward 20 years. And now we're looking at these wines, and I'm getting a lot of the same. Richness with a hum. But what if, you know, what's changed in the last 20 years? You've made great wine too for the last 3 decades. What have we seen moving from, say, the early 90s into, you know, 2010 with regards to just Chardonnay for you?
Well, if we stick specifically with Nielsen Vineyard, almost absolutely no change. And that's when I started working with Nielsen Vineyard in 1979 at Zaca Mesa. And I have made wines from Nielsen Vineyard every year since then. And the glass, what's in the glass is the reason why. The wines have always turned out to be very special wines. And I've never thought of, it's not, oh, you know, hey, this is something I've done, I've made a special wine. I've given total credit to the vines. It's just those vines in that area really make incredible Chardonnay. They always have, and I think as long as the Chardonnay vines are there, they always will. But when people want to talk about the Chardonnay, it's always important for me to have them taste it first, because then what I'll do is I'll tell them how it's made, and if I tell them how it's made first, then they'll have a whole different perception about the wine. But this is a wine that's made in the French tradition winemaking style, so it's all barrel fermented, malolactic, surly, batonnage, and almost all native yeast. There's one barrel that I'll inoculate for insurance against the rest of them, but it's never been a problem. So, you know, here, if I said that, you would think of this butterscotch, oaky, alcoholic, old style California. That's really, it's never really been this wine. The site is a relatively cool site in Santa Maria Valley, but the soils end up giving wines that are very high acid, very low pH. So we have to, and always have, put these wines 100% through malolactic. It's not, oh, I want to follow the style of malolactic. This is, you got to do it.
Right, you have no choice.
You have no choice.
Right.
But then with this vineyard, because you have low pH, you don't get the butterscotch, because the bacteria, when they convert higher pH wines through the malolactic process, that's how you get the butterscotch. And you know, if we think back to the 70s and 80s, these big oaky alcoholic Chardonnays were kind of what was in vogue. And then everybody burnt out on them, probably the winemakers first. What, taste these things again? But you know, thank God, this with the Nielsen Vineyard was an exception. Because it had a lot of fruit, and a little bit different than most what we think of California Chardonnays. The signature of the Nielsen Vineyard Chardonnay has always been the same. It starts off at either like a lime or a lemon, depending on how cold the vintage is, as soon as you finish the wine. And the colder the vintage is, more of that lime or lemon if it's not quite as cold a vintage. But then it's been very predictable, going from kind of, then it goes into the apple phase, into the kind of the Pippin, then it'll merge into the Golden Delicious, Gala, Fuji. And now, this is the 2010, pretty predictable. It's beginning to go into the pear phase. And fast forward this wine another 2 or 3 years, you'll get more and more pear and hazelnut kicks in. And when this wine ends up having appropriate amount of age, which will be another 2, 3, 4 years, this will have full-on pear hazelnut. And there's really nothing wrong with that concept.
No, that's called perfectly aged Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is, and I don't like to equate California wines with Burgundian or vice versa, but this wine will end up to be more Merceau-like than California Chardonnay, and it always has. And part of that, of course, is the winemaking style, but also the site, because it does have that very low pH, so you have to put it through malolactic. And this is the Wente clone of Chardonnay, which is a very small berry, so you have a high skin ratio. And because of that, then you're going to have a lot of phenolics, that bitterness. So then it becomes very important to do this full tilt barrel fermentation. We talked about malolactic, the aging on the solids, stirring the solids, the batonnage process, the native yeast fermentation, where everything there is to add more richness to the wine. It has a silky elegance because of the winemaking process, but it can have some edgy phenolics if you don't do everything else to it.
Right.
So it's kind of because it just somehow this vineyard and the tradition of winemaking and white Burgundy have really worked well together for many years. So it wasn't something I invented. The French have been doing it for many
And
years.
a little bit of experience with the site.
Yeah, well, it's always been a great site. So here's to Uriel and the father of viticulture. In
Oh,
Santa
good
Barbara.
Lord, I drank all mine.